The moment Warren stepped into the small, bustling diner, he knew something was off. The energy felt tense, conversations were hushed, and the employees moved with a nervous urgency he didn't like. He had built this company from the ground up before selling it years ago to focus on other ventures. When the new ownership expanded to 13 locations, he stayed on as a silent partner, watching from a distance. But lately, complaints had been piling up: rude service, high turnover, and customer dissatisfaction. Warren wasn't the kind of man to rely on second-hand reports. He needed to see it for himself. Disguised as a weary traveler's scruffy beard, worn-out hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low, he looked like any other customer. No one at this particular location had ever met him in person. Most of the staff probably had no idea who he was. That was exactly how he wanted it. He slid into a booth and glanced around. A middle-aged manager in a stiff button-up stood near the counter, barking orders at a young waitress. "Move faster, Olivia. We don't have all day." The girl Olivia apparently flinched but kept her head down, rushing to refill a customer's coffee. Warren frowned. She couldn't have been older than 20, and the exhaustion in her eyes told him this wasn't the first time she'd been treated like that. A few minutes later, a waitress with a warm smile approached his table. "Hey there, welcome in. My name's Vanessa, and I'll be taking care of you today." Her voice was light, but Warren didn't miss the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her notepad. "Thanks, Vanessa," he said, offering a tired smile. "What's good here?" She seemed to relax a little. "Honestly, the classic cheeseburger's a solid choice. And if you're feeling adventurous, the peach cobbler is homemade. Sounds perfect." "I'll take both." As she scribbled down his order, a commotion erupted near the counter. Warren turned just in time to see a man in a suit storm in. His expression twisted with irritation. "Why is this place such a disaster?" the man snapped. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of entitlement that made Warren's stomach turn. The manager rushed to meet him. "Mr. Dawson, I've been getting complaints left and right about this location," Dawson interrupted. "Slow service, missing orders, customers walking out." "What's the excuse this time, Brian?" Warren watched as the manager Brian sputtered, clearly desperate to shift the blame. "It's the staff, sir. They don't listen. They're lazy. I've been trying to keep them in line." But Dawson's eyes scanned the room, landing on Vanessa as she handed a to-go bag to a customer. "You," he barked. "Come here." Vanessa stiffened but obeyed. "Yes, sir." "What's the hold-up on orders?" Dawson demanded. "We're short-staffed today," she said carefully. "2 people called out sick, and we're doing the best we can." Dawson scoffed. "Excuses. If you people worked harder, we wouldn't have these problems." Warren clenched his fist under the table. He had no patience for men like Dawson bosses who saw their employees as disposable. Just then, the bell above the door jingled, and an elderly woman shuffled inside. She moved slowly, gripping a cane, her eyes scanning the room uncertainly. Vanessa immediately turned to help. "Let me get you a seat, ma'am." But before she could take a step, Brian grabbed her arm. "Where do you think you're going?" She blinked. "That woman needs help." "We don't have time for that," Brian snapped. "Get back to your tables." Vanessa hesitated only for a moment. Then, with quiet determination, she pulled away and walked over to the elderly woman. "Here, let me help you, ma'am." Brian's face darkened. Dawson turned to him, voice sharp. "You see what I mean? No respect for authority." Brian nodded. "You're right." He turned to Vanessa. "You're done. Get your things and leave." The diner fell silent. Vanessa's breath hitched. "What?" "You heard me," Brian said. "You're fired." The elderly woman gasped. "For helping me?" Brian ignored her. "You want to waste time instead of doing your job? Then you don't have one." Warren stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Brian glared at him. "Sit down, sir. This doesn't concern you." Warren pulled off his cap, leveling a cold stare at both Brian and Dawson. "Oh, it definitely concerns me." Dawson frowned, clearly annoyed. "And who the hell do you think you are?" Warren let the silence stretch before answering. "I own this company." The blood drained from Brian's face. Dawson's arrogance wavered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Vanessa's eyes widened. "You're—" Warren nodded. "Yeah." The diner remained dead silent. Then Warren turned to Vanessa. His voice was firm but kind. "You're not fired. He looked at Brian and Dawson. But you two? We need to talk. The weight of Warren's words settled over the diner like a heavy fog. Every employee, every customer, even the cooks peeking from the kitchen, stood frozen, their eyes darting between him and the two men who had just humiliated one of their own. Brian's mouth opened slightly as if trying to form a response, but nothing came out. Dawson's expression shifted from irritation to barely concealed panic. He recovered quickly, straightening his tie as if that would help him regain control of the situation. "Mr. Hayes," Dawson finally said, forcing a chuckle that held no real humor. "I wasn't expecting you. If I'd known you were coming, we would have." "Done what, exactly?" Warren cut in. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Dawson visibly tense. "Treated your employees like human beings? Or just hidden the way you actually run things?" Dawson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Warren turned to Vanessa. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Yeah, I think so." Warren nodded, then faced Brian directly. "You fired her for helping a customer. Explain that to me." Brian shifted on his feet. "She wasn't doing her job. We're understaffed as it is, and she left her section when we were already behind. I was enforcing company policy." "Company policy?" Warren repeated, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Brian, which policy states that employees should ignore elderly customers who need assistance?" Brian swallowed hard. I was just following expectations set by upper management." He cast a desperate look at Dawson, who remained stiffly silent. Warren exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw as he considered his next words. He had built this company on the foundation of quality service and respect for both customers and employees. If this was what it had become under Dawson's leadership, then it was worse than he thought. He turned to Vanessa again. "How long have you worked here?" She hesitated before answering. "A little over a year." "And in that time, have you seen this kind of treatment before?" She glanced at Brian, then Dawson, before looking back at Warren. Her hesitation spoke volumes. "Yes," she admitted. "A lot." Warren's gaze swept across the room, landing on Olivia, the waitress who had been scolded earlier. "Is that true?" She shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "Yes, sir." Warren looked at the other employees. One by one, they gave small nods, confirming what he already suspected. Dawson finally found his voice again. "Look, Mr. Hayes, we run a tight ship here. Sometimes that means making tough calls. If employees aren't performing." "She was performing," Warren interrupted. "She was doing exactly what this company was built to do, taking care of customers." He turned to Brian. "And you punished her for it?" Brian's face was growing redder by the second. "You're done," Warren said firmly. "Get your things and leave." The silence that followed was suffocating. Brian's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You can't just—" "I can," Warren said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I am." Brian looked to Dawson, expecting him to intervene, but the other man remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. With no support, Brian's bravado crumbled. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the back, shoving through the kitchen doors. Once he was gone, Warren turned to Dawson. "You and I need to have a serious conversation about how this company is being run." Dawson straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain some control. "Mr. Hayes, I assure you." "Not here," Warren cut him off. "We'll talk at corporate. But hear me now, if this is the culture you've allowed to fester under your leadership, expect changes." Dawson's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly. Warren took a breath, then turned back to Vanessa. "You're staying. And I'll be making sure you're properly compensated for everything you've put up with." Her eyes widened. "I thank you." He nodded, then looked at the rest of the staff. "Things are going to change. You all deserve better." A slow ripple of relief passed through the employees. Warren took one last glance at Dawson before walking toward the door. He had seen enough. Now it was time to fix what had been broken. The moment Warren stepped out of the diner, the weight of what he had just witnessed settled heavily on his shoulders. He had expected issues, but the level of disrespect and mismanagement went beyond what he was prepared for. The way Dawson had allowed Brian to run the place, the fear in the employees' eyes, it wasn't just a one-time incident. This was a pattern, a culture that had taken root under the new leadership. The drive back to corporate headquarters was a quiet one. Warren's mind churned through everything he had seen, every detail of the diner's operation or lack thereof. If this was happening at one location, how many others were dealing with the same toxic environment? How many employees had been pushed out for simply trying to do their jobs? By the time he stepped into the building, his decision was made. He wasn't just going to fix the diner, he was going to overhaul the entire company. Dawson was already waiting for him in the conference room, standing stiffly by the window. He turned when Warren entered, his expression carefully neutral. Warren took a seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Dawson to do the same. There was no need for pleasantries. Warren asked how long Dawson had been aware of the turnover issue. Dawson hesitated before admitting that some locations had struggled with retention, blaming it on a lack of strong work ethic among younger employees. Warren didn't buy it. Good employees didn't just leave without reason. He pressed further, asking about the management training process. Dawson explained that managers were given full autonomy to run their locations as they saw fit, with minimal oversight from corporate. That was the problem. Without accountability, managers like Brian had been free to mistreat their staff unchecked. Warren leaned back in his chair, considering his next words carefully. He told Dawson that the culture of the company had shifted in the wrong direction and he wasn't going to stand by and watch it crumble. Dawson's expression remained composed, but Warren could see the tension in his posture. He asked Dawson if he had ever taken the time to visit locations unannounced, to see firsthand how they were run. Dawson admitted he had not, stating that he relied on reports from regional managers. Warren's jaw tightened. Reports could be manipulated. The truth was in the day-to-day operations, in the way employees were treated when they thought no one important was watching. Warren then laid out his plan. Immediate manager evaluations across all locations, mandatory leadership training, and direct employee feedback channels. Dawson's face darkened slightly, but he nodded. Then Warren got to the real issue. He told Dawson his leadership had allowed this culture to spread. Whether it was by negligence or intent, it didn't matter. Change was coming, and it was coming fast. Dawson straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening. He asked if Warren was implying that his position was at risk. Warren told him plainly if Dawson wasn't willing to adapt, he wouldn't be staying in his role much longer. Silence stretched between them. Dawson exhaled slowly, nodding once. He said he understood. Warren wasn't sure if he truly did, but that was a problem for another day. With the corporate side addressed, Warren turned to fixing what had been broken at the diner itself. The next morning, he returned unannounced. The atmosphere was noticeably different. Brian's absence had lifted some of the tension, but there was still uncertainty in the air. Employees were wary, unsure of what was coming next. Warren gathered the staff for a meeting before opening hours. He told them that changes were coming, that mistreatment would no longer be tolerated, and that their voices would be heard. Some looked skeptical, others cautiously hopeful. Then he turned to Vanessa. He told her that what she had done helping a customer in need was exactly what this company was supposed to stand for. She had shown kindness despite the pressure around her, and that was the kind of employee he valued. He offered her a promotion to shift supervisor. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She asked if he was serious. He told her he wouldn't say it if he didn't mean it. Slowly, a smile broke across her face, and she nodded. As the staff dispersed, Warren stayed behind, watching as the employees moved with a little more confidence than before. It would take time to rebuild trust, but this was the first step. He wasn't going to let his company become something he didn't recognize. Not anymore. Warren remained at the diner for the rest of the day, not as an observer, but as someone actively working alongside the employees. He assisted Olivia with clearing tables, helped in the kitchen when the lunch rush got overwhelming, and even took a few orders himself. The moment he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, the tension in the air slowly began to ease. Employees who had been wary of his presence started to relax. By the time the afternoon lull hit, Warren had seen enough to know that the problems at this location went deeper than just Brian's mismanagement. The understaffing issue was real, and without enough hands on deck, employees were constantly stretched thin. Equipment in the kitchen was outdated, slowing down production. And the employees, despite their efforts, weren't given the tools or support they needed to succeed. He pulled Vanessa aside near the kitchen entrance where the noise was minimal. She was still adjusting to the idea of being promoted, but the spark of confidence in her eyes was already growing. Warren asked her what she would change if she had the authority to fix things. She hesitated for a moment before saying that the biggest issue was burnout. She explained that shifts were often scheduled with no regard for how exhausted people were, and employees were afraid to complain because they had seen others punished for speaking up. Warren listened closely, taking mental notes. Then she mentioned something that made him pause. She said that Brian had a habit of cutting hours when employees requested time off as a way to punish them. And worse, if someone quit, he wouldn't replace them right away, forcing the remaining staff to pick up the slack. That was the final confirmation Warren needed. Brian hadn't just been incompetent, he had been deliberately making things harder for his team. After the conversation, Warren stepped outside and made a call to corporate. He instructed them to immediately review staffing levels at all locations. Every diner that was short-staffed needed additional hires within the next 2 weeks. He also ordered a full audit of scheduling practices, making it clear that retaliatory hour cutting would not be tolerated. Once that was set in motion, he turned his attention back to the diner. He pulled Olivia aside, asking her how many hours she worked compared to what she had been promised when she was hired. She admitted that her scheduled hours were often cut last minute, and she could barely keep up with her bills because of it. Warren assured her that those days were over. Later that evening, when the last customers were finishing their meals, Warren gathered the staff together once more. He told them the changes that were coming not just at this location, but across the entire company. He made it clear that corporate would no longer leave them to struggle on their own. Vanessa asked if these changes were permanent or if things would eventually go back to the way they were. Warren promised that this wasn't a temporary fix. He had let go of the reins for too long, and he wasn't making that mistake again. Then he did something no one expected. He handed out his personal contact information. He told them that if they ever experienced mistreatment again, they could reach out directly. There would be no more managers like Brian getting away with abusing their authority. The employees exchanged glances, some still processing the fact that the owner of the company was standing in front of them, treating them like they mattered. Olivia, who had been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke up. She said that no one had ever taken the time to listen to them before. Warren nodded. That was exactly the problem. The next morning, he was back at corporate, sitting in a meeting with Dawson and the rest of the leadership team. He laid out the structural changes that needed to happen. First, there would be a dedicated oversight team visiting locations unannounced to ensure employees were being treated fairly. Second, all new managers would be required to complete leadership training before taking their positions. And third, a direct feedback system would be put in place, allowing employees to report workplace issues without fear of retaliation. Dawson was visibly uncomfortable, but he didn't argue. He knew the situation had spiraled beyond his control. Warren informed him that if he failed to implement these changes, he would be replaced. Dawson gave a clipped nod, acknowledging that he understood. By the end of the day, Warren had set everything in motion. The company would no longer be a place where employees were undervalued. The toxic leadership that had taken root was being torn out, and in its place, a culture of accountability was being built. Before leaving the office, Warren received an email from Vanessa. She simply wrote that for the first time, she felt hopeful about coming to work. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was just the beginning, but it was the right one. Warren sat in his office reviewing the latest reports from the oversight team he had dispatched to various locations. The findings were a mix of expected and concerning. Some diners were running smoothly with managers who genuinely cared about their teams, but others mirrored the dysfunction he had witnessed firsthand. The issue wasn't isolated, and that only solidified his decision. Real change required more than just policy shifts. It needed a full-scale cultural reset. He had already removed Brian and put Dawson on notice, but the deeper problem wasn't just a few bad managers, it was the lack of accountability at every level. Managers had been allowed to operate unchecked, and employees had been conditioned to accept mistreatment as part of the job. That mindset had to be broken. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a call from Vanessa. He picked up immediately, sensing from the urgency in her voice that something was wrong. She explained that a former employee had reached out to her after hearing about the changes happening at the diner. The woman, a single mother named Rachel, had quit months ago after Brian cut her hours to the point where she couldn't afford rent. She had asked for a stable schedule, but he retaliated instead, leaving her with no choice but to leave. Now she was struggling to find steady work, and Vanessa wanted to know if Warren could help. He didn't hesitate. He asked Vanessa to set up a meeting that evening. When Warren arrived at the diner, Rachel was already waiting. She looked wary, as if expecting another empty promise from someone in power. He could tell she had been through enough disappointments. He listened as she explained what had happened, how Brian had slowly reduced her hours whenever she requested time off for her son's doctor appointments, how he had ignored her when she tried to address it, and how he had eventually told her that if she didn't like it, she should quit. She had held on as long as she could, but when her hours dropped so low that she couldn't cover rent, she had no choice. Warren didn't interrupt. He let her speak, taking in every detail. When she finished, he told her the truth: Brian was gone and the company was no longer tolerating that kind of treatment. Then he made her an offer. If she wanted to come back, she would not only get her job back, but he would ensure she had a stable schedule that worked with her responsibilities as a mother. Rachel looked skeptical at first. She had every reason to be. But after a long pause, she nodded. The next morning, Warren was back at corporate, putting together a formal policy that would prevent what happened to Rachel from happening to anyone else. From now on, managers would be required to provide consistent scheduling for employees, with flexibility for those who needed it. Any retaliation in the form of reduced hours would result in immediate disciplinary action. As he finalized the details, Dawson walked in. He had been keeping a low profile since their last conversation, but now he looked uneasy in a way Warren hadn't seen before. He sat down without being asked and admitted that after their last meeting, he had started reviewing complaints from employees across multiple locations. What he found was worse than he had realized. There were more Brians out there, managers who pushed employees to exhaustion, cut corners, and dismissed customer service in favor of efficiency metrics that didn't reflect reality. He admitted that he had focused too much on the numbers and not enough on what was happening on the ground. Warren listened, then asked the only question that mattered: was Dawson willing to be part of the solution? There was a pause before Dawson answered, but when he did, it was clear. He was. Warren laid out the next steps. A company-wide meeting would be held, bringing together managers from all locations. The message would be clear: what had been tolerated before was over. New policies would be enforced and oversight would be permanent. Dawson nodded and stood to leave, but before he walked out, he turned back and admitted something Warren hadn't expected. He said that when Warren first called him out, he had been angry not because he thought he was right, but because he knew he had failed. He had convinced himself that as long as the company was growing, everything was fine. Warren didn't respond right away. He knew the kind of mindset was what had led the company into this mess in the first place. But recognizing the problem was the first step to fixing it. As Dawson left, Warren exhaled. This wasn't just about one diner anymore. It was about rebuilding a company that had lost sight of what mattered. And he wasn't going to stop until it was done right.